that was sort of my other challenge after the blisters is we sort of reached a point where I thought we were 90% of the way there, and it turned out we were only at like 12.6 in terms of the vertical, and we still had another almost 1,500 of vert to go, and I was like, I don't know how on earth I'm going to do this.
Episode 1066 with Matt Leskanic skiing his first 14er.
You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast, brought to you by 180 Tech. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there. Now here's your host, Kurt Linville.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. So, a little bit of housekeeping for starting out. If you did not hear the last episode, 1065, then there's some news to catch up on. This is Kurt Linville, not Mason Gravely, obviously. Mason got too busy in life, and he and I agreed that I would start taking over the show again. So if you haven't heard the details on that, that's in the last episode. But anyway, you've got me, and I'm excited to once again be part of the Adventure Sports Podcast. I believe that this show has so much value, not just because it's fun, and we celebrate fun, but because by encouraging people to get out and try new sports, get involved with nature, more family time, more friendship time, more time moving and being healthy, I think it makes a difference, a positive difference in the world. That's the goal of the Adventure Sports Podcast. So today's subject is kind of on skiing, but it's also on 14ers. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time on skiing. Ski season, at least in North America, is wrapping up. A lot of the resorts are closed. Some are lingering. They'll still be going for a few more weeks. But with the season closing out, it may seem like it's a funny time to talk about skiing. But actually, this is the time of the year when the snow consolidates and you can more safely do ski mountaineering, AT skiing, so you do the alpine touring, where you can go into the backcountry more safely. And so that is game on right now in April. And by June, a lot of that's done. Everything melts out. Snow gets too heavy. So we're actually in perhaps the middle or the hottest part of the backcountry ski mountaineering season. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Our guest today is Matt Leskanic. And what's cool about this, remember, the Adventure Sports Podcast is about encouraging people to try new things, right? So Matt is an advanced skier. He's been skiing his whole life, and he's skied all over the world. We're going to talk about some of that, but this last weekend, Matt did his first 14er with climbing skins and skied down his first 14er. It was his first big mountain backcountry adventure. So I'm excited to hear from Matt about what it's like to do the 14er skiing for the very first time. Matt, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Kurt. Thank you so much for having me on. And hey, congratulations for resuming your role back with the show. I can tell how passionate you are about this show and bringing adventure and outdoor life to everyone in the world. So congratulations, and thank you so much for having me here.
Oh yeah, you bet. It's going to be fun to talk to you about what it's like, even though you're not a newbie to skiing. I'm really interested in what it was like to do your first 14er and what all that involved. And then we'll add the skiing element to the 14er. But for starters, 14ers don't actually happen that day. Usually 14ers involve the day before a little bit and things like that. So just give us a sketch of what the actual 14er event was like.
Yeah, so the day before we got in, and we thought we were going to be able to camp right near the parking lot, but I suppose in Summit County, you're not allowed to camp right in the lot. You have to go at least a quarter of a mile in. So we ended up going back towards Alma, Colorado, and finding a nice place to camp out there. We had a pretty short night, as you might expect. We woke up, we went to bed around 11. We woke up around 4 o'clock in the morning, and then we started our hike around 6 a.m. So that was kind of the start of our adventure that day.
So early start. And what mountain were you working on there?
We were doing Mount Quandary right outside of Breckenridge, about half an hour out of there.
Okay, so what's cool about Quandary is it has a lot of terrain that's below critical angle for avalanches. It makes it a safer option. You should never go in the backcountry if you are not avalanche trained or with people that at least can guide you that way. And but Quandary actually has a lot of terrain that is below critical angle. You could probably do almost all winter long. Although there are parts of Quandary that definitely are like couloirs that are very steep that you should avoid in midwinter that I think some people might be doing this time of the year. Boy, that's risky even this time of the year. But point being, Quandary is a great mountain to be your first 14er to ski. But what was the climb like?
Man, the climb was a much bigger climb than I kind of expected, and I grew up in the Northeast climbing a lot of the 4,000 footers and climbing Mount Washington, but this was a really big day. Like at one point I asked the guys, hey, what are we, about a third of the way up, maybe 40%. And they're like, no, we're maybe a quarter. It was the very part before you even get above the tree line. And that was just, kind of the elementary part of the climb. So
yeah.
Much bigger day than I expected overall. I think, from kind of start to finish, we started at 6 a.m. and I think we got to the top maybe around 12:30 or so. And part of it was just, it was our first 14er or my first 14er. And we were, huffing and puffing, taking really small steps. And, but it was a bigger day than I expected.
Yeah. 14ers are nothing to joke about. I mean, most of the 14ers in Colorado are just very long hikes. You don't have to be technical on most of them. The hardest 14ers in Colorado, there are places where a rope would be nice. You get some exposure and you're hand over feet climbing the rocks and stuff like that. But most of the 14ers in Colorado are just really, really long hikes. And for those of you who are out of state who maybe haven't heard about what a 14er is, it's a 14,000 foot tall peak, or 14,000 or above foot tall peak. There are 54 of them in Colorado. And there are 4 more that we call bonus peaks that are also over 14, but the saddle between the main peak and that peak is not deep enough, according to some rules, and you can make your own rules, folks, for those to count as independent peaks. But there's still peaks over 14, so altogether there are 58 of them. Obviously, on the Adventure Sports Podcast, we've talked about climbing mountains of all sizes, but we've talked quite a bit about the 14ers. It's a beautiful sport. It's an amazing experience to get out there and to do the hike that's that long. But also, once you get to around tree line and above, it's a different kind of an experience. The air gets really, really thin. And I mean, it's not like doing an 8,000 meter peak, but you get a taste of it. So what was the altitude like for you?
Yeah, so at first it wasn't all that difficult, but I think once we reached like in the 13s, the last few steps got really, really challenging. And I think I got a little delusional by the top that, we were with Daniel and there was a guy that was taking a video of us and I thought it was some old guy and it turned out it was Daniel. So, I think the altitude definitely threw me off a little bit, but it wasn't, at the very top, my wife Lydia she had packed a couple of the oxygen things and I was like, I don't really need that, and I don't think I really did, but when we were at the top and we were hanging out there, it's like, you know what, we have that there. I might as well take a puff or two, So everyone kind of enjoyed that, and Daniel and Caleb tried it as well. But yeah, the altitude was a little difficult. I think for me, to be honest, Kurt, the most tricky part about it was only my second time ever skinning. I had skinned once before with Caleb in Monarch, and I've pretty much been a resort skier my whole life growing up in Boston. And so skinning and having that repetitive motion up the whole mountain was, I think way more challenging. Even though you go a little faster with skinning, I think hiking up in the summer is a lot easier. And that repetitive kind of back and forth motion with the skinning and having the bag on my back, it actually ultimately resulted in me sort of having a partial cartilage tear in some of my ribs that I'm feeling a little ginger about today, about a week later. But yeah, so I think that was one of the tougher parts for me personally.
So I know you're in great shape, but the question is, how good a shape do you have to be in to try this one? What would you think?
I think you have to be in pretty darn good shape. I mean, I think that some of the guys as well said that once you do a couple 14ers, it just gets easier and your body gets used to the motion. I kind of went from a period of, without skinning, without hiking. I skied a lot this winter, but I didn't really do much hiking. And so I sort of went from 0 to 60. And I think that repeated motion is kind of what resulted in my little bit of an injury. But I would say, yeah, I think you have to be in pretty good shape overall, especially to do it in the winter.
People from out of state, when they come to Denver, sometimes they notice the altitude at 5,000 feet because they live closer to sea level. But when you go up to a 14er and you're climbing that's an even bigger difference, right? From 5 to 14 is 9,000 feet. So it's a big elevation change. And some of the recommendations, if you're coming to this state and you want to try a 14er, it really helps if you can hang out at altitude for a few days before you start climbing. I climbed my first, 2 or 3 14ers from sea level is what I like to say, because I came up to the Denver level, was here for a little bit, a few days, and then went straight on up a 14er. And those kicked my butt. I can say those were the hardest 14ers I ever did. And it's because I wasn't fully acclimated to the altitude. But more of the 14ers that I've done in recent years, we live at almost 8,000 feet right now. So we're sleeping high, and that makes the 14ers a lot easier. Mm-hmm. But even if you're acclimated to Denver, 5,000 feet, the 14ers are more challenging, I think, at altitude because it's a bigger change. Just as an aside, altitude sickness is real, and altitude sickness can be dangerous. If you have any sort of a heart condition or anything like that, before you start just going up to altitude and exerting yourself, you should talk to a doctor. But that said, for healthy folks, usually the first symptoms are like a headache, mm-hmm. and then nausea. And then after the headache and nausea, it kind of turns into an extreme headache and nausea and disorientation. You feel dizzy. And if you go beyond those symptoms, that's when you can get in trouble. I know a gal that was hospitalized because of what was going on with her altitude sickness. You actually can get, you get swelling in the brain is what it is. And I was trying to remember the medical term, but you actually can get swelling inside of your head, and that'll hospitalize you. So if you're going to altitude, it's really no joke. You should pay attention. Key things are to drink a lot of water and acclimate by spending time at altitude before you exert yourself. All the big mountain climbers, they do this so that they can go higher more safely and actually get to the top of some of the big peaks. In Colorado at 14,000 feet, I'm not going to say you're safe. The gal that I know that was hospitalized because of swelling in her brain, I believe she she lived at like 5,000 feet, maybe not quite that high, but I believe she slept at altitude, and she ran into altitude sickness, like at 12,000 feet, and ended up in the hospital. So anyway, it is generally safe, but be aware, the only cure for altitude sickness is going back down. Yeah. And so if you have a slight headache, that's normal. If you feel like you're car sick, that's actually normal. If you start having a severe headache, it's time to go down. But one of the best things you can do is to drink a lot of water and just don't go so fast, right? So anyway, that's a long aside to say this was your first time to hike up to altitude like that. Did you get a headache or anything?
Yeah, I had a little bit of a headache. I probably could have used a little bit more water. I carried 2.5 liters with me, which would seem like plenty, but I probably would have liked another liter. I think staying at altitude, like at around 9,000, 10,000 feet the night before, was really helpful. Just to, even coming from Denver, just to acclimate a little bit further and not trying to do it in that same day, obviously, which would be really tough. And then I think the other thing that I've sort of realized with altitude is putting a ton of sunscreen on is super important. Yeah. We had a really, really beautiful sunny day, and reflecting off the snow, I put an incredible amount of sunscreen on, and I'm peeling, and I still got a ton of sun. I think it's near impossible not to get burnt on a on a 14er. But yeah, I think that's another big thing I've learned recently overall.
We're talking about all the things that can go wrong, but a lot of things go right. One more thing that can go wrong is snow blindness.
Yeah.
You've got to protect your eyes because you are at altitude. The sun is brilliant. The snow is reflecting that in your eyes. And people go blind sometimes for days with snow blindness.
Wow.
And we interviewed a guy on the Adventure Sports podcast. He had his goggles were fogging up as he was climbing Everest. And what he realized is that he had the double lens on his goggles and that somehow moisture got between them or something. So he ripped the outer lens off of his goggles and he still had the inner lens on. And that allowed him to see what he was doing. But what he didn't know is that he had removed the ultraviolet protection. And so he literally went blind on top of Everest at the summit. Could not see a thing. Blackout. It's an amazing episode. I don't remember the episode number. But anyway, he came down Everest alone, blind, felt his way off of that mountain, managed to got some help, and then got to the airport. Someone put him on the plane. He flew home to, I believe it was Seattle, and he was still blind by the time he got home to Seattle. So no joke, you got to take care of your eyes at altitude. And so make sure you have the right sunglasses and that you use them. I mean, these are all the cautionary tales. But why do we do this in the first place? It's for the challenge, for the fun, to learn something about ourselves. So how big of a challenge is it really to skin up a 14er?
I think it's up there in one of the bigger challenges I've done in my life. I think it's, I really consistently push myself, but I would say it's in a top 10, top 20 challenge, which, it's, you don't see that every day. It was definitely a challenge. And I think honestly at the top, like you talk about like what makes this, we talked about all the bad things, but it was just so rewarding to be up there, like to have a 360-degree view of just all these incredible, beautiful mountains. And for me to, I live here in the Denver area, to think that that's in my state just a few hours away. Like this is where I live. I actually only moved here a little over a couple of years ago. And so, just I felt an immense amount of gratitude to live in such an incredible place. But I think that view at the top and really soaking it all in made it worth it.
Part of the fun when you get to the top is after you've climbed a few 14ers, you start to recognize them. So when you get to the summit, I always think it's fun to look out in the distance and say, oh, wow, that's the elk range over there. Oh, well, that's the Maroon Bells, and be able to identify stuff. I don't know. It's just such a beautiful view. It's breathtaking. And I think the first few times I got to the top of a 14er, I was just kind of almost overwhelmed just with awe. You get views like this from the top of a tall mountain when you take a lift up as well. But when you walk up a mountain, it's a different experience at the top. And I don't know if you experienced that. But I have over the years. If I drive to the top of a mountain or take a ski lift at the top of a mountain, it's like, oh, this is very pretty. You really appreciate it. But when I walk to the top of the mountain, I have a summit experience. Did you experience that on this trip?
Yeah. And I know at one point there was sort of a false summit that looked like it was a little higher than the actual summit, but we could see all the people at the other summit. It's like, and I was like, and a couple of the guys were like, well, we could kind of stick around here and take pictures here. And I'm like, no, we're going over there. we're summiting this thing. So yeah, it felt very rewarding. And I think like, when you go up a ski lift, it's not, it's still beautiful, right? But I think, just realizing that you conquered that mountain and you started from the base and you made it all the way up there. And I think having the 360 views too is really, really special. Like it kind of feels like you're on top of the world. Like I think it's sort of our closest way of feeling like we've climbed Everest without climbing Everest, We're doing it on our backyard, right? So, yeah.
I've often wondered what it is that makes it so different. Part of it is just I've earned this. But that's not all. What also happens is the exertion somehow, I think, triggers those feel-good hormones. When you get to the top, you kind of get that rush, like a strong feeling of accomplishment, but you're also getting endorphins. You're getting oxytocin. You're getting, adrenaline and all these feel-good hormones that they just change the experience. And I'm going to go off in the weeds for a second here. But lately, I've begun to realize more than ever that how we encounter the world is our choice. And how we encounter experiences helps to determine the gift that is given by the experience. Some people could climb a mountain and maybe feel the endorphins, but just go, okay, so I climbed a mountain, blah, 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 and they get down to the car and I did it. Or you can get to the top of the mountain and you can say, what could I learn from this? What is this experience? What about this experience is going to inform the way I think about who I am to some level, or how I would encounter challenges in the future on some level? Yeah. And if you're open to saying, what does this experience have to show me? You learn things. And I have found that to be just a much more enjoyable approach to living life, is to take the time to not just discount everything and move on, but instead to say, what can I learn from this? And in nature, I often have experiences that I can't fully explain. And if I got too scientific about it, it would just become empirical anyway. But if you stop and you say, what can I learn from this? How is this impacting me? There's almost magic in it.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. But more than that, I will say this about 14ers. I've been climbing 14ers since I was 18 years old, and that's been a few years. And then I started climbing 13ers because I decided that I wanted to get away from the crowds. So you climb to 13.9. It's the same experience, but no one's there.
Yeah.
It's the same experience, but without a trail. Yeah. It's the same experience, but without all of the things that make it feel touristy, right? What I learned from these experiences in the wilderness, I think, was a sense of stick to it when it's hard. It's if I can do this, I know I can do other things. And when life throws some really hard challenges at us, knowing that you had to dig deep and that you overcame the challenge on a mountain somewhere can help you with other challenges in life. How deep did you have to dig for this 14er?
Yeah, I had to dig pretty deep, and part of it was that halfway up, I was starting to feel some blisters develop in my heels, and so I took off my ski boots, I took off my socks, and I had two massive, like $50 sized blisters on each heel. And fortunately, I had a first aid pack and I was able to do it. But I said to the guys, I'm like, man, these really, really hurt. Like, I don't know, I knew that I was going to do whatever it took to make my way up. But it very much kind of brought out that stick-to-itiveness in me. And I just said to myself, like, it's the most primal, like, thing you can kind of do, right, is hike a mountain, right? Just put one foot in front of the other. Sometimes in life, I feel like we complicate certain challenges and add a lot of variables that may or may not be there. But when you're on a mountain, we could see the peak. We were about halfway there, and it was like, no, all I need to do is if I put one foot in front of the other, we'll eventually make it up there. And the funniest thing happened was I thought, oh man, these blisters are going to start to get worse and they're going to hurt even more. But it kind of reached a sort of a plateau on the pain. And I think my body effectively just kind of recalibrated and said, hey, like, you have blisters, you patched them up a little bit. They still hurt like heck, but as long as you just keep your eyes on the goal and keep putting one foot in front of the other, then you're going to do it. And the pain kind of went away in my head, or at least it reached a bearable level, and then we ended up making it happen. So it was very kind of very fulfilling to kind of conquer that pain.
We should also talk about skinning. So this is your second time to skin up something. And even when you say skinning, some people are like, what are you talking about? So we're talking about climbing skins on the bottom of your alpine touring skis. And alpine touring skis allow you to lift your heel as you climb, but then your heel locks in when you ski back down. So it's a beautiful setup. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Whoever invented that, they need a Nobel Prize. Anyway, the climbing skins are like a really thin carpet with adhesive that sticks to the ski and a nap in that carpet so that they can only slide one direction. So as you're going up, they literally stick to the snow and you can just walk up it. But you're dragging skis and ski boots, which are not light, on your feet. You know, and backpackers will tell you, I don't know what the ratio is, but I've heard something like a pound on the foot is like 20 pounds on the back or something like that. So did it feel really heavy walking?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was sort of my other challenge after the blisters is we sort of reached a point where I thought we were 90% of the way there, and it turned out we were only at like 12.6 in terms of the vertical. Right. And we still had another almost 1,500 of vert to go. And I was like, I don't know how on earth I'm going to do this. I was out of breath. And then what I did was I basically said, I'm going to take 30 steps and then I'm going to take 10 seconds and I'm going to catch my breath a little bit. And then I'm going to do another 30 steps and then I'm going to take 10 seconds. And that seemed to, I kind of reached that plateau too, where it was just, it didn't get really any harder. I didn't get any more out of breath than I already was. And as long as I waited that 10 to 15 seconds, I'd be back in breath and ready to go. So that was probably the other big challenge I had, but persistence I think paid off and, just a really good lesson to kind of apply to regular life.
I kind of chuckle because there are a lot of people in Colorado that do 14ers. I've heard it's over 100,000 a year that might climb even a given mountain, maybe. But so Coloradoans, people come to Colorado to do 14ers. People that live here do 14ers. If you've done a handful, then you know what Matt's talking about. You get to the point, of this is hard, I can't get my breath. But on your first mountain, it's kind of a shock. It's kind of a surprise. It's like, well, I knew that the air was going to get thin, but really? And after you've done several, you expect it. Mm-hmm. And when it comes, you're like, oh, there's my old friend. I remember this, But it's cool to hear your perspective. Like, okay, 30 steps, take a breath. You have skied a lot. You grew up skiing. You've skied places all over the world. But this was your first time to ski completely off-piste, right? And to climb the mountain that you're skiing down when it's a big mountain. So how was the skiing? How would you say the skiing was compared to other experiences?
Yeah, I mean, the skiing was really great. It was a little bit tracked out in times because it's a popular mountain to ski. But I think having that relief once we got to the top, knowing we can breeze down this in 20 minutes or whatever, not that we were rushing, right? But the first half of the mountain was perfect spring skiing conditions where it was just beautiful soft turns, really fresh snow. It was just stunning, having amazing views. The second half, it got a little bit heavy by the bottom, and it was some of that stop-start snow that gets a little bit funky on you. But it was amazing skiing down. It was gorgeous.
I started backcountry skiing or AT skiing a few years ago and was just amazed at the snow conditions because in the resort, you're sharing the mountain with 10,000 of your closest friends. And when you get out of the resort, even if it hasn't snowed in 2 or 3 weeks, you'll be skiing fresh POW in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because you can go places where no one's been in that time. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and put this public safety announcement out. This is really important. Backcountry skiing, folks, it's no joke. You need to have avalanche training. You need to know how to be safe. And so I live in the Crested Butte, Gunnison Valley. When my son was taking his avalanche course, the instructor said, because of the climate in Colorado and the height of the mountains and all of that, we're known for our champagne powder. But that actually makes Colorado the highest avalanche danger in the world. And then he went on to say, and the mountains around Crested Butte, because of the slope angles, they're the most dangerous mountains in Colorado. So what that means is we ski in the place that has the most dangerous mountains for avalanches on the planet, but we don't ski that terrain. And it was a decision that we made. As a young skier, when I was first learning to ski, I would look up a big mountain somewhere in the backcountry and see a couloir with the most beautiful looking run coming down, the right slope angle, powder, blue sky. It would just call to me. I didn't realize that the reason that there is a beautiful open couloir was because avalanches rip the trees out of the ground about every 3 years. So those very seductive, it's the siren's call, don't do it. Don't do it. We lose quite a few skiers in the backcountry in Colorado every year. And in the Crested Butte area, it's very common. We lose sometimes one, sometimes three, sometimes five skiers a year. Oh, man. And we're not talking about people who don't know what they're doing. We're talking about people who do know what they're doing. So one of the problems with avalanche safety training is that it makes you think that you can read the snow and decide if it's going to slide or not. And people that teach this training will say, yes, you can learn a lot more about how the snowpack is, how stable it is, what kind of loading it has, what slope angles are, all the kinds of things, what slide layers do. You can learn all these things, but in the end, the mountain will still surprise you. So, just a word to the wise. If you're coming to Colorado and you see something that looks amazing and you and your buddies decided to try to, put on your ski boots and carry your skis up something, kicking in steps, and don't do it. Just refrain until you're trained. And there is one way that you can be safe, relatively safe, without having to worry about avalanches. And what that is you ski below the critical angle. You don't ski stuff above the critical angle, and you don't ski below faces that are above the critical angle. There was an avalanche several years ago where I believe 5 people died. They were skiing below the critical angle in what would have been a safe place, but there were some people above them, way up high on the mountain, that either they weren't properly trained or they took an unnecessary risk. They triggered a slide that took out the 5 people below. And so the 5 people below probably thought they were being relatively safe. But in the end, you have to look out for what's above you as well. So what's the critical angle? You take an Avi course, but 30 degrees is generally accepted as a limit. 25 is a safer limit. If you can ski terrain that's below 25 or 30 degrees, you're very unlikely to trigger a slide. And it doesn't sound like that steep because the double blacks in the ski resorts, which are avalanche mitigated, they might be 45, 50 degrees even. Yeah. If you want to ski the steeps, do it in the resort. Because they mitigate those slopes so that you can enjoy that. The backcountry is about a different experience. At 25 degrees and champagne powder, with a bonny blue sky, no noise, solitude, and the powder is bottomless, and you're floating on a cloud. Yeah. It's not about the double black, jumping the cliffs and all that kind of thing. It's about having an outdoor, a wilderness experience. Yeah. And it is so cool to get into that terrain. But I'm just saying, people, be aware, avalanches are no joke. Don't take the risk. We just make sure that we ski below the critical angle. And if you ski above the critical angle, if you judge the snow carefully, you're well trained, you'll get away with it for a while. But the guy we lost last year had been skiing in the backcountry and been well-trained, and he'd been skiing like that for like 20-plus years. The guy we lost the year before that was the fellow that actually engineered avalanche mitigation for the ski industry like many decades ago. He was the father of avalanche mitigation, and we lost him. So if you ski above the critical angle long enough, well, I don't need to go on. Okay, enough of the public safety announcement. Just make sure you know what you're doing. Yes, it's a glorious sport, and you should not be afraid of it if you know what you're doing. Just be safe. Like anything else, be safe. So how would you wrap up the experience on the 14er, your first 14er?
Overall, I really enjoyed it. I think it was a good challenge. I think if I do it more, and when I do it more, my body will get more used to it and just get a little bit more acclimated with the elevation, what to expect, the skinning process, having a light pack. I think just all the things that you talked about, you get more used to it, I would imagine, as you do it. But climbing that summit, persisting through the blisters and through the, kind of the other just tiredness generally, and getting that 360-degree view, and then being able to ski down it were just amazing rewards that I really look forward to doing again.
Okay, I want to shift the conversation a little bit because, well, this is Matt's first time to ski a 14er. He is actually someone who has skied places that a lot of us just dream of getting to ski. And I'd like to hear a little bit more. I mean, for instance, this winter, you went to Chamonix, you skied that whole valley and that whole area, but you actually went up and skied the glacier. And I don't even know what the name of it was, so tell us that story.
Yeah, absolutely. So we went over to France. We skied first. We were at Les Trois Vallées, the Three Valleys, for 9 days, and it's actually the world's largest ski area, ski resort, and it's 3 valleys, 3 resorts. Courchevel is on the left. In the middle, you have Maribel, where we stayed, and then Val Thorens is on the right. Val Thorens has some really extreme terrain. They also have La Folie Douce, which is a little bit of an après ski type place right on the slopes, which is a very, very cool scene. So we were there for 9 days. What really struck me about that skiing was they had 188 lifts at that resort, which, coming from here is just absolutely mind-blowing. But what was funny for me was that under each lift, it would basically be one trail per lift, and it would be one big groomed trail, and you would mostly stay on piste at this resort. So it was sort of a different brand of skiing. It wasn't like, oh, let's just dip into this glade or let's check out this random bowl. Of course, there was a little bit of off-piste, but so Les Trois Vallées was absolutely stunning in terms of the views. The food was amazing. We had a really great time there. I also thought it was sort of funny that the lift lines were very much every man or woman for him or herself. Basically, there was no organization at all, and there would be one choke point, and it might be a 6-person lift, but there would only be 3 or 4 turnstiles to go through, and then there'd be a short little area afterwards where you'd have to continue to merge again. And in the U.S., it's a 6-person chair. They have six turnstiles, right? Yeah. So I thought that was sort of funny. Just every person for themselves. So that was Les Trois Vallées. We had an incredible experience. Chamonix is a really, really special place. It very much has an authentic old school ski village, outdoor village type town. I think every outdoor enthusiast should make it a bucket list item to go there. Typically most people will ski in the morning, or they'll do their paragliding, and then in the afternoon, you'll go into town and maybe have a beer, and you'll see people with their ski boots on or their kite equipment kind of hanging off their back. And it's just kind of, you get a whole bunch of characters that love to be outdoors and love to do the most extreme, daredevilish, crazy type stuff. So it's really a pretty special place. And so when we were there, we had done this thing called Vallée Blanche, which is this massive glacier just outside of Chamonix. You take one of the lifts all the way up. It's actually lift accessible. And you go from, I think, around 3,000 or 4,000 feet in the village all the way up to 12,000 feet. So it's a pretty remarkable vertical stretch. And so you take a couple of gondolas up, and then at the very top, there's an area where you have to put on some crampons to hike down, because there's a really steep there's a steep ridge on both sides, and you could probably do it with a boot pack, but you put the crampons on because that's kind of what the guide tells you to do. They also highly recommend, and I don't know if it's mandatory, but they highly recommend that you hire a guide to take you down the glacier, because there are crevasses everywhere, and the guides, a lot of the time they're skiing that glacier every single day, so they know exactly where the crevasses are. In our case, our guide, she had been skiing it, I think, the past 30 or 40 days in a row, so she knew it like the back of her hands. We got really lucky with the conditions. The day before, they had gotten 2 feet of snow. And the day that we went was a perfect bluebird day. So we just got the best of both worlds with some incredible fresh powder and just a stunning, beautiful sunny day.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. There are 2 things that I was thinking about. I saw a picture of the top of this where people are hiking down with their crampons. And I looked at the slope angle and the snow load, and I said, you would not do that in Colorado. And the reason I want to make that point is because in Colorado, it would have been a death trap, but the snow is different in different places. The moisture content, how it consolidates as it comes down, it's not the same. Just because you've been somewhere else and you thought, well, that snow is stable, doesn't mean it is in Colorado. So that's a point that I wanted to make for people. But then the other thing is, when they get big snow like that and there's wind, then the crevasses disappear sometimes. Snow bridges form, right? So what did the guide tell you about these snow bridges and what to look out for?
Yeah, so one of the pieces of feedback they gave us was to not stand right next to each other, because that can create a lot of a load in one area, and that can actually potentially crack the glacier. Fortunately, I think we were lucky with all the snow, and I think that they seem to have more issues when the snow is really light. Well, the night before, I was almost going back and forth in my head, like, hey, should I really do this? Is this worth it? And fortunately, they'd gotten plenty of snow, and we had an amazing guide as well. She did a tremendous job. But recently, I think a couple weeks ago, there were 3 people in the same day that died on the glacier, in different areas, falling into crevasses. So it's very much a real threat. Yeah, you have to be really careful when you do something like that.
Well, sometimes we forget the glaciers are moving. They are cracking and they are changing. So what was safe a day before may not be safe today. And that's the reason for the guide, right?
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a remarkable experience. So you described like 9,000 verts. How long was this run? How long did it take you to get down this glacier?
Yeah, I think in total it was about 3 hours. And that was us, we stopped for lunch, and we had a little picnic on the glacier at one point, and we stopped for pictures where there was this sort of incredible ice field that had these massive ice chunks the size of houses. You hear about stuff like that on Everest, but there was kind of a whole ice field on the glacier. So we really took our time, and I think if you wanted to go top to bottom quickly, you probably could do it in maybe an hour and a half. If you're trying to set a course record, you could probably do it in under an hour. But it's a lot of vert, and it was nice to just take our time and enjoy the snow, and it was stunning.
The Colorado resorts can have a lot of verts. I don't know of any that have quite that much because the base is just so much higher, right? There's no way. But you get on a really long run in Colorado, and if you're a decent skier and just go for it, it's a 10-minute run. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's a long run in Colorado. I have seen people take hours to get down one, but that's because they're struggling. Anyway, to be on a run where, you took a couple of breaks, but it took you 3 hours to do one descent, that's not something I'm accustomed to. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool. So you've skied other places too. How would you compare the snow? Okay, you've skied East Coast, you've skied Colorado, you've skied Canada, now Chamonix and the European skiing. What is the snow like in these different locations?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I think chasing snow and the lightest snow is always a skier's dream. And Colorado is definitely up there in terms of really light, fluffy powder. That's really pleasurable to ski. I think also in that conversation, and some of the lightest in the world, I would say you have British Columbia specifically. Not really like Whistler as much, but more so Revelstoke, Kicking Horse. It can be really light and amazing there. I know when we skied there last year, they hadn't gotten really any snow for about 10 days, yet the snow preserved incredibly well. And they got, I think, a couple centimeters, and that still turned into a really somehow deep powder day for us. So I think the way the snow preserves there is really stunning. And then also in that conversation is Utah as well. Some of the snow, especially in Little Cottonwood Canyon with Alta and Snowbird, is just absolutely world class, and they get a ton of it too. So I would say those are two of the best alongside Colorado in terms of light conditions. I would say the East Coast gets a little bit of a bad rap in terms of it does have heavy snow, and I think one of the faults at times is they can get a bit of freeze thaw, or occasionally they get the dreaded rainy day in February or March, which really puts a stunt. It really stops the season in its tracks for a week sometimes. But the snow is at times it can be nice, but it's a little heavier, of course. Because they don't have the elevation that Colorado or Utah have. But that's where I grew up skiing, and so I'm a little bit biased. But I would say, I could talk about terrain and stuff, but I think the East Coast terrain in some ways makes up for it, because there are some really narrow, nice, bumpy New England lift line type runs, and I think and some good glades and at places like Jay Peak, which got 470 inches of snow this season. I just checked. Yeah. So there really is some great skiing there, and I think it's a good training grounds. I think if you can ski the East, especially places like Mad River Glen or Jay Peak, I think you can ski anywhere. That's my East Coast bias kicking in a little bit. Yeah, and then I think France, in terms of the powder, it was pretty light overall, I'd say. I don't know if it's quite as light as some of like Colorado, Utah, Kicking Horse, Revelstoke, but I think it's almost as light. It was pretty nice.
Well, I'm completely unqualified to make any statements at all because I don't have any experience there. You grew up doing a fair amount of skiing, and it's a big part of your life. But how do you think that altered you, who you ultimately became, and who you may have been without skiing? I mean, that's speculative. But how did having an outdoor sport kind of shape your childhood and impact your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it gave me a sense of confidence in myself and my abilities that I may not have had otherwise. I grew up skiing with my cousins in Maine. We grew up skiing at a little mountain, my home mountain called Shawnee Peak, now called Pleasant Mountain. They since I grew up in the Boston area, they grew up in Maine, and they skied every single day or almost every day after school. In fact, there was one day, I think it was Wednesdays, where they literally left school at 12:30 to ski the rest of the afternoon. And I think that was part of the school's program or something along those lines. And so when I was 5 or 6 years old, trying to follow, my two cousins through the woods, going down double black diamonds, I constantly wiped out. I constantly hit ice, or, maybe bumped into a tree here or there, yard sailed. I think what I learned, though, was that every year when I would go, we'd probably do about 10 days a season when I was younger. But I gradually got better and better. And then we started skiing out west and doing Utah, Colorado, going to Lake Louise and British Columbia and Alberta, and starting to see these really steep ridges with chutes and couloirs. And, at first being a little nervous, and then realizing I can do it. And now having that confidence, standing on the side of a 50-degree chute or whatever that you have to straight line, and being like, yeah, this is no problem, I can do it. I think that breeds kind of a sort of an inner confidence that, my body no longer, it doesn't hold me back in any ways. Like I can send it off a massive jump or a cliff or a chute. And I think, I think when you conquer things like that in nature, that little problem at work that seemed like a huge problem it's not a big deal, right? Like that, I think conquering things in nature, I think helps you kind of contextualize problems that you might have in your regular life.
You know what? It's not always about having fun. It has a lot to do with health, mental health, tenacity, managing difficult situations with a cool head, being able to be self-reliant, to trust yourself that you can get out of difficult situations. And then just physical health, being strong enough to be able to have a healthy body, to be able to do the things you love to do. And that really is an invitation, for people who want to feel healthy in their own bodies. Find something you love to do. And in your case, skiing was a big part of that. For other people, it might be backpacking, or it might be mountain biking, it might be road biking. It can be all sorts of sports, water skiing, you name it. But these are athletic things, and as you do them, it gives back. And fun is important, but fun's not, I don't know if it's a primary reason to do these things. Maybe in the beginning, that's the attractor. But the reality is, I think that when you realize this is making me stronger, not only physically stronger, but I've gained mental fortitude. And mental fortitude is such a valuable character quality for getting through all of life. Would you say that skiing contributed to your fortitude?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that observation. I think the mental health element of it is something that people don't talk about that often. Like being able to push through blisters and through shortness of breath and to make it to the top, or to get, you get almost cliffed out and there's a mandatory straight line shoot, and to be able to kind of look at yourself, in the proverbial mirror and be like, I have no other option but to do this. But you know what? I'm going to come out on the other end. I may fall on my face, but I'm going to do it no matter what. I think that builds a lot of character.
I was listening to some astronauts being interviewed the other day, and I was thinking about the risks, the level of risk that they're taking, the amount of mental fortitude it takes for them. I mean, think about just something like coming back from the International Space Station, which now seems pretty commonplace. People do it all the time. You're getting in a little capsule that has an ablative layer that's going to burn off on reentry into the Earth's atmosphere. You're essentially a meteor, hoping not to become a meteorite, and somehow you're going to steer this thing into a descent angle and all that kind of stuff so that parachutes can open if they open, and so you can land in the right place if you land in the right place. And I just thought the fortitude, the calm, cool, collected, calculated, I'm on it, that's required to do crazy things like that. That's what you gain from adventure sports. Well, Matt, thank you for sharing your first 14er story and helping us to kind of see maybe a bigger view of what skiing is about. A lot of people who ski not very often, and it's a fun family trip, and I applaud that, but maybe they haven't seen the other side of what happens when you've skied for a lifetime. Thank you for sharing all of that with us, and we really appreciate it. And for all of you listeners out there, skiing may not be your thing, or maybe it is, but whatever you choose to do, find something that will call to you so that you can grow in that fortitude and in that physical endurance and in health and in mental health, and so you can have fun. Until the next show, get out there and have some fun.